Welcome to Eggs and Issues, a monthly business forum presented by the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce, bringing timely economic discussion to the region for nearly 40 years. Thank you to our sponsors and partners. Presenting sponsors: Central Maine Power and MEMIC. Cooperating sponsor: Martins Point. Reception sponsors: Clark Insurance, KeyBank, and Preddy Flaherty. Community Corner sponsor: Goral Palmer. Tomorrow's Leaders and Entrepreneurs sponsor: AAA Northern New England. Parking sponsor: Impeople Credit Union. Photography sponsor: Wooler and Company. Media partners: radio sponsor: WGAN. Print sponsor: Maine Trust for Local News. TV sponsor: WMTW Maine's CW. Business news sponsor: Maine Biz. Our venue partner: University of Southern Maine. And thank you to our special community partners: Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, Kennebec Savings Bank, MEMIC, Spectrum Healthcare Partners, Southern Maine Community College, and the University of Southern Maine. And now, please welcome Portland Community Chamber President, Rob Atkinson.
Good morning and happy holiday. Oh my gosh, I guess we can finally say that. Welcome to Eggs and Issues. We're so glad you could join us for the final session of our fall Eggs and Issues semester, Portland, a 21st century city. My name, as you heard, is Rob Atkinson. I'm the Director of Marketing and Public Relations at MEMIC, and I'm honored also to serve as the volunteer president of the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. This morning, we've got a great discussion. We'll discuss the impacts of climate change in our working waterfront and how sea rise level and coastal flooding are impacting Portland in ways and we'll also discuss ways we can protect the waterfront while also preserving sustainable growth. Today's Eggs and Issues, Rising Tides, Realizing Growth in a Changing Climate, will connect climate science with the realities facing businesses and highlight actionable steps we can take now to prepare Portland for this change. As a reminder, this event is the final event of the fall semester of Eggs and Issues. The spring semester of Eggs and Issues, Maine in Focus, will begin on February 12th, and it will cover a lot of important topics such as Maine's healthcare system, housing development barriers, Maine's K-12 education system, and we'll also have an elections overview. Eggs and Issues spring semester passes are now available for purchase, and discounted ticket booklets are always available at portlandregion.com. All right, now I want to thank all our sponsors of Eggs and Issues who have returned this year to make this event possible for the entire season. Without our sponsors, as you can imagine, we could not deliver the high-quality speakers, panels, and presentations you've come to expect, so thank you very much. I'd also like to extend a very sincere thank you to our special community partners. These businesses and organizations support not just Eggs and Issues, but all of the nearly 70 events the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce produces throughout the year. So please, a round of applause for our generous sponsors and partners. And this is just as exciting. Please join me in welcoming these new members to the Chamber this month. We continue to have wonderful growth with membership. which really reflects the vibrancy and strength of our regional business community and the vital roles our members play in driving economic success. So we thank these businesses and organizations for coming to the Chamber to add fresh energy, ideas, and leadership to our network. So thank you very much. We're also, got a lot of exciting news here, we're also excited to introduce our new Director of Advocacy, Thomas O'Boyle. Thomas will track policies that affect the businesses, communities, and provide timely updates from local, state, and federal governments, explaining how each development what that could mean for your business. Thomas, if you're here, could you please stand and be recognized? There you go. We're very fortunate to have him. And also, before I want to move on, please take a look at your program and take a note about the Maine Health Food Pantry. You can scan the QR code for more information, but really here, the need is great and the message is urgent. More than 900 families rely on this pantry each week for food, so if you can help, please do. A quick reminder, complimentary parking is available for all Eggs and Issues events. Just validate with promo code EGGS2526. And if you can't do it, like I couldn't do it this morning, please ask a Chamber staff for help. This month's Community Corner is Furniture Friends. Furniture Friends is an awesome organization, and it's a vital greater nonprofit dedicated to providing essential furniture from beds to kitchen tables to local individuals and families transitioning out of homelessness, domestic abuse, or other crisis. Furniture Friends addresses the critical gap between secure housing and creating a home, which is essential for workforce and housing stability. This organization is remarkable. It recycles more than 2.6 million pounds of furniture, which keeps that out of Maine landfills every year. And to do this, they rely on the generosity of volunteers to make this work possible. Last year alone, 400 volunteers donated more than 4,000 hours of their time to make this happen. So please, if members of Furniture Friends, if you're in the room, would you please stand and be recognized? Thank you for all that you do. There's also volunteer opportunities, as I learned this morning, so if you would like to learn more about this wonderful organization, please make sure you connect with them before you leave. Our Tomorrow's Leaders and Entrepreneurs program gives local students free access to Eggs and Issues, so for all the students in the room with us today, thank you for joining us. Okay, on to the main event, and let's dive right in. We are fortunate to have experts here today from the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. Our panelists are Glenn Prickett, who is the Gulf of Maine Research Institute President and CEO, Dave Riedmiller, Gulf of Maine Research Institute Chief Impact Officer, and moderating today's discussion, Quincy Hensel, President and CEO of the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce. So please welcome them to the stage.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to give another shout out to Furniture Friends. We're really excited that they're here as our community corner. And you know, we talk a lot at the Chamber about homes and housing. That's a huge issue. And we can give somebody a house, but it doesn't become a home until it's actually furnished. So they play a really important role in our community. And longtime Portland City Councilor and a good friend of the Chamber, Tae Chong, has recently taken over as Executive Director. So we're really excited to be partnering with them today. So thank you for being here. And thank you, Glenn, Dave, for joining us. GMRI has been a really wonderful partner of the Chamber for as long as I can remember, and we have just an incredible appreciation for the role that GMRI plays, not just in Portland and in Maine, but really globally. I think you all know they're a remarkable marine research institute that plays on the international stage, and they're doing a lot of great work, but among other things, they are working really hard to both protect and to strengthen the Gulf of Maine, which we are so lucky to have right here in our backyard, and to protect and strengthen the communities that rely on the Gulf of Maine. Portland, South Portland, a lot of our communities within our chamber footprint, and just a lot of communities in Maine. So thank you for all the work you do around that. And I've always appreciated their openness to collaboration, not even openness, like desire and like hunger to collaborate with organizations, because we are not going to be able to tackle the most pressing challenges our community faces alone. We have to collaborate with all interested stakeholders, and I feel like nobody does that better than GMRI. And really exciting news, you maybe saw in the paper, I think it was earlier this week, a partnership was announced between the City of Portland and GMRI to really work towards building coastal resiliency. I know we have some city councilors in the audience, so we're excited for that, and we look forward to working with you on that partnership as we move forward. So I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later.
We will.
And we have a lot that we want to cover. So today, I think one of the top things we want to talk about is sea level rise. I think that's something we all hear about. We see it in Portland. If you live or work or visit Portland over the last few years, you have probably seen the impact of sea level rise. So we want to dive into that. Talk about the risks of not addressing these types of challenges and the type of economic costs that would come with inaction. Obviously, with challenges, there's opportunities. So we're going to talk about that as well. And then having a room full of interested individuals and businesses, we definitely want to talk about how all of you can get engaged and participate in combating climate change and ensuring that we have a very thriving ecosystem here in Maine. So that kind of sets out the agenda.
Great.
And I think to kick it off, just I think is a good solid base for today's conversation, maybe each of you, will start with Glenn, if you can just talk about your role at GMRI and what drew you to working here on the Maine coast, if it's not obvious enough.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful place to live and work, but we'd love to hear from you about what drove you to this work.
Sure, thank you, Quincy. And thanks to you and the Chamber, Rob. Thanks for inviting us to be here today. It's really an honor to be on the stage with you. And thanks everyone for getting up early and being here. It's great to see a strong turnout, and I think it really shows that people care about this issue, have questions about how climate change will affect all of us. It's something we all share, that challenge and the opportunity of adapting to a changing climate. So Quincy, as you said, it's not a hard draw to come here to the Gulf of Maine and work on anything, but I was drawn here for the mission of Gulf of Maine Research Institute, which you should see behind me. Oh, there we are. So I spent the last 35 years before I moved here in Washington, D.C., and that's something I think you'll hear from Dave. We have that in common. We both had a life upgrade to move here to Maine.
I like that.
But I worked on international development and environmental conservation and climate change for 35 years in Washington. And we made a lot of progress, but in my last few years there, as progress was slowing down on the international level and now even on the national level, I really wanted to work in a place that I loved, where people could come together from all walks of life and solve problems in a practical way, and then share those solutions around the world. So when I had the opportunity to come to Gulf of Maine Research Institute, I jumped at it. It's really a special and unique place. Founded just about 30 years ago. I had the honor of succeeding Don Perkins, who was the founding CEO, and we combined scientific research with education and community and economic development in a really impactful way. So that drew me here, and our vision is that we can help communities in the Gulf of Maine with the knowledge, the resources, and the relationships that they need to make their communities and their ecosystems and their economies thrive. And then based on the solutions we can build together here, we can share them with other parts of the country and other parts of the world. And as you mentioned, we're starting to do that in some of our programs. But it really all boils down to collaboration. All of these challenges, whether it's sea level rise or some of the other things we work on, are too big for us, for any one organization to solve alone. So, we're here to share knowledge and resources and relationships with you, and already are collaborating with a lot of people here in the room, and look forward to more. And now, over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Glenn. I'm Dave Riedmuller. I'm the Chief Impact Officer at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, and in that capacity, I oversee our education, community, and economic development departments, basically the non-research side of the house. And it's really trying to translate the research and science that not only what we do, but also what others are doing into action and impact in the communities that we seek to serve. And I came here 5 years ago, at the beginning of the pandemic, as Glenn said, from DC. My background, I'm a climate scientist by training, and really enjoyed kind of applying science for societal benefit, and did that in a variety of roles in the federal government, including at the State Department, where I was one of the negotiators for the Paris Agreement, and then in the White House, where I led the National Climate Assessment. And it was in that capacity that I got to know GMRI's former Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Andy Pershing. And incidentally, I just happened to say to him at one point, hey, if anything ever opens up at GMRI, let me know, because I've been wanting to move to Maine my whole life. 2 years later, I get an email out of the blue from Andy saying, hey, we're launching a climate center, you should think about applying. And the opportunity was too sweet to pass up, and I got an opportunity to really come here and like Glenn said, move from working at sort of the global, international, and federal level, which was great and exciting in a lot of ways, but also sometimes felt detached from the on-the-ground reality of what businesses and people were trying to do to address climate change. And so now to be able to do that is incredibly not only inspiring, but really fulfilling on a personal level. And every day walking through the halls of GMRI, you can just see program after program after program, the achievements that we're doing, the partnerships that we're building, and frankly, the impact that we're having in the communities. And it's a really inspiring place to be.
We are very lucky to have both of you here in Maine, just down the street on Commercial Street. So thank you for making the hard decision to move in the beautiful state of Maine.
It was a struggle.
Struggle, I know. It's a struggle. Dave, let's start with what I think is one of the most obvious outputs of climate change, at least in our region, and that's sea level rise and coastal flooding. Like, we are seeing it more and more, especially in downtown Portland. So talk a little bit about how that is impacting Portland and the surrounding communities.
Sure. Yeah, well, I'd be remiss as a scientist if I didn't include at least one plot in this presentation. So this, I think, is the only one. But suffice to say, if you don't want to look at the graph, you can look at the pretty image, which is a nighttime image of what we call sunny day flooding. And the intent here is to demonstrate that, you know, even when there's not a big storm, we experience flooding here in Portland. And I'm sure all of you have sort of seen and experienced that. And what you see in the plot that goes back to the early 20th century is that we have already experienced about 8 inches of sea level rise over the past 100 years. All right? And what's projected to happen as a result of melting ice sheets on Greenland and Antarctica, melting glaciers throughout the world, and also the thermal expansion of water, right? When you heat up water, it expands. Mm-hmm. And all of those factors are causing seas to rise. And as we heat up the atmosphere, more and more of that sea level rise is occurring. And you'll see that that blue shaded part is really what's projected to happen over the next 100 plus years or so. And the important thing to note is that while we've experienced 8 inches of sea level rise to date over the past century, it's only accelerating. And what that means is that our risks are only going to increase with time. And while there's global mitigation efforts to try and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the unfortunate part about sea level rise is that even if global emissions went to zero tomorrow, the seas would continue to rise for centuries to come. And so we are locked in to some level of sea level rise for quite some time. And the shading represents just how much more are we going to experience. And as we'll touch on a little bit later, the state has really been a leader in dealing with this and starting to think about it, and has established 2 different scenarios, this so-called commit to manage scenario and this prepare to manage scenario. And those are just different levels of future sea level rise. And the point I want to make here is that the commit to manage scenario is looking at 1.5 feet of sea level rise by mid-century and 4 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century. Now think about that. We've experienced 8 inches to date, right? And we've already started to see impacts. Now double, triple, quadruple that over the next 50 years. We're going to see profound impacts. And so days like this that happen a small handful of times during the year now are by mid-century going to happen maybe once a month. By the end of the century, it's probably going to be a couple times a week. And so we as a community need to start pulling our resources together, get creative, and think about what the next steps are. But this is really kind of the scene setting and what the science is telling us.
Yeah, I think I remember last year seeing this. It was a beautiful sunny day in Portland and walking down Commercial, and the wharf that has Jay's Oyster and Luke's Lobster was totally underwater.
Right.
Like you could not get through there, and that was really eye-opening. There hadn't been a storm, there hadn't been wind, rain, and yet the wharf was completely submerged. Let's do a follow-up to that question, and this can go to both of you, but what is the real cost to the city of these types of storms and flooding, and what does that mean for how we plan and how we want to think about investing moving forward?
Yeah, that's what we're all here to talk about. We don't have a lot of time this morning, and there's so much to that question. One of the things we want to do is leave everyone here with some knowledge and some resources that you can pursue. So encourage you all to look at One Climate Future, which is the climate plan that the city of Portland and the city of South Portland created together, and that gets into a lot of the risks and opportunities from climate change. And I'll talk about another report a little later on, but this isn't just hypothetical anymore, we're living it. So this image you see is evidence of that, and I think what was galvanizing to so many in the city and across the state were the storms we experienced 2 winters ago in December 2023 and January 2024. The December storms had a statewide impact that created power outages for days and a lot of flooding from the rivers up and down the coast. And then a month later, in January, we had back-to-back storms that came from the southeast, an unusual direction from storms. So that, combined with the 8 inches of sea level rise Dave spoke about, and an unusually high tide when the storms hit, it was the perfect storm. And it led to tremendous flooding here in Portland and up and down the coast. And all told, the damage from those 2 storms was $90 million. And in the January storms, over half of the state's working waterfront was either damaged or destroyed. So we're starting to see the impact already. And to break that down a little bit, the risks that we all face, whether as citizens, as business leaders, as community leaders, certainly there is critical infrastructure that is disabled and very expensive to repair from these storms. But behind that, tremendous added risks to public health, to public safety from the storms, from the floods, from the power outages that leave people stranded in the winter without heat and that disrupt day-to-day life. And then for business leaders, you have the families of the people who work for your organization and who do business with your organization put in harm's way, which is going to lead to interruptions in your business, disruptions in business continuity, disruptions in supply chains of what you bring in and what you sell out to the rest of the world. So the business and economic impacts begin to magnify. And we'll talk a little bit later on about how we invest in solutions, but there have been studies at the national level that shows that a dollar invested in climate resilience can generate $13 in benefit through the avoided costs of all the things I just mentioned.
And I'd just add on the planning front, you know, the state and Governor Mills has taken a real leadership role in the wake of those storms. She established the Infrastructure Rebuilding and Resilience Commission, which the composition of it was, we try not to take it personally, that there wasn't a whole lot of nonprofit representation on there, but the intent was really to kind of mobilize private sector interests and state government representatives as well as kind of local governments to understand how businesses and companies are thinking about these risks and what do they need to rebuild and rebuild with resilience, right? And so much of that is around permitting reform and things of that sort. And so that commission's report, I would encourage folks, if you haven't dug into it, to take a look. And it lays out a roadmap of very practical steps that not only the state government can do, but also businesses and local governments to really work with one another to kind of cut through some of the red tape and enable resilient rebuilding and frankly doing it in a timely, efficient, and cost-effective manner.
So Glenn, you talked a little bit about like the impacts of climate change. So from like a business and a community perspective, what would you say are our biggest risks if we don't take the necessary steps to adapt?
Yeah, I think it's the direct cost of the infrastructure that we will have to repair or replace, which is very expensive. And it is the indirect costs in human lives, in lost time and productivity that all of our businesses will face. So again, getting back to that point that investment in resilience, and we'll talk in just a moment about some practical steps businesses and communities can take, can generate a lot of returns in avoiding those human and economic costs.
So David, so GMRI has developed tools like coastal flood maps and resilience modeling, which is incredible. How are these helping cities like Portland and soon South Portland as well to make smarter decisions about development and about infrastructure?
Yeah, so it's a great question because so much of what we want to do happens at the local level, right? And so while global action is incredibly important, the impacts of climate change are felt at a hyper-local level. And this is a complicated slide here, but what you're seeing is a satellite image of Union Wharf and Widgery Wharf, and overlaid on that is water depth based on, basically you can see here, 4.5 feet above mean highest high water. And that's roughly equivalent to kind of what we saw to an extent at those January storms. And what we've done is some highly localized, site-specific assessments of what that water level will look like. Because a lot of times if you look at some of the maps that are out there about what flood risk look like, it's what we call a bathtub model. It basically just like moves the water inland a little bit, right? But there's a lot of nuance based on kind of topography and how different things are shaped. And one of the interesting things about Union Wharf in particular, for example, is that the flooding isn't necessarily from overtopping on the side of the wharf, but it actually has a bit of a concave shape, and the water actually comes up from the storm drains. And so that's why you see the deepest flooding is actually in the center of Union Wharf, not on the sides. And what that has allowed us to do as owners and stewards of Union Wharf is to do a very in-depth characterization of what critical infrastructure is at risk. Glenn mentioned that obviously that's one of the biggest risks for business continuity. And so whether it's a given heat pump or furnace or electrical panel, how high are they off the ground? And how much are they at risk? And by characterizing that risk, we can now work with our facilities team to develop a list of kind of prioritized investments over time. Okay, we need to elevate that heat pump first. We need to elevate that electrical panel next, right? And so now we're partnering with the city. I know Greg Watson is somewhere here in the audience, the Housing and Economic Development Director of the city, with him and with Troy Moon, the Sustainability Director, to translate a lot of this information to waterfront properties across not only the harbor side, but certainly in Back Cove as well. There's a lot of ripe development opportunity in Back Cove, and there's also an opportunity to do so in a highly resilient way. And some of the tools that we're developing, and I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight our partnership with the Rue Institute in this point as well. We're about to unveil a new tool, an interactive tool that will allow property managers, wharf owners to really assess their risks at a hyperlocal level beyond just what we can see here.
So I knew personally some of the things we are doing in Portland to combat climate change. Talking to the two of you, I learned a lot more about what GMRI is doing and helping cities really adapt to changes in climate and coastal flooding. What was interesting talking to the two of you, because I just didn't know the answer to this question, was how do we compare to other communities nationally, or even how do we compare globally? I wasn't sure if we were ahead of the curve, behind the curve, so I thought it might be interesting if you shared a little bit about that with our attendees today.
Yeah, why don't you go to the next?
Sure, yeah.
Dave mentioned our partnership with the city, and I earlier mentioned One Climate Future. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, one of the reasons we both came here is that Maine is very much a leader on the national stage in climate action generally, and certainly Portland is at the forefront of cities of our size in addressing these risks of climate change. What's interesting is around the country and around the world, some of the large cities in our region like Boston or New York have invested in a lot of action on climate resilience. But when you get to the cities at a more medium size like Portland, and then certainly when you get to the smaller towns up and down the Gulf of Maine, there's been relatively little that the cities have been able to do. So there is a lot of political will here in Maine, I would say on a bipartisan basis, to tackle these climate challenges, the impacts we see every day. But often for cities like Portland, and certainly for smaller towns, the resources just aren't there. So the reason we created this partnership with the city, and you see here an event that we hosted on our wharf, Wrights Wharf, where our lab sits on Commercial Street, just last week with the mayor and Greg and Troy and other city leaders, was to put the capacity that GMRI has, the science we do that Dave just highlighted, in service of what the city needs to do to plan and invest for resilience. So what you see here is the resolution that the City Council passed. It was a great honor and to have that formal introduction, but Dave and Troy and Greg and their teams are already hard at work figuring out how can we deploy that modeling that Dave shared to places like Back Cove or Commercial Street, to take some practical steps to guard against the rising seas.
And I think I would just add, there's a number of things that the city has done, obviously One Climate Future being chief among them, but they've instituted some really forward-thinking policies like their Coastal Flood Resilience Overlay Zone. You say that with me now? Yeah. But that Coastal Flood Resilience Overlay Zone is a really innovative policy tool that has mirrored some of these bigger cities that Glenn mentioned have experimented with. And what it is it retains the existing zoning, but it provides an overlay, because what the traditional tool are FEMA flood maps, which everybody may have heard of here, and everybody probably has heard something negative about them. And part of the reason why those FEMA flood maps are a challenge from a planning perspective is that they don't incorporate sea level rise. All they do is look at historical flood risk. And so what this Coastal Flood Resilience Overlay Zone is really takes a forward-looking approach and thinks about different categories of infrastructure, whether it's critical infrastructure like hospitals or government buildings or things like that, or more resilient or sacrificial types of structures like parking garages or storage areas or construction yards, and provides a kind of sliding scale of design standards based on what the specific use is. And so it's a really innovative policy tool. So in that sense, I think the city really is in many respects on the leading edge.
And I'll continue this conversation with Glenn, because GMRI is really known for your community engaged research. You do a great job engaging community and collaborating and really bringing everyone to the table who wants to be a part of the conversation. And this will be an interesting question, I think, for the group as they're all sitting here thinking to themselves, like, how can we engage in this work and what's the role we can play? If you can talk a little bit about how are you working with local stakeholders like elected officials and businesses and residents to really make sure that science is leading to real world action?
Yeah. So as I said earlier, it really is all about collaboration. And one of the initiatives that we're really excited about and proud of is around building climate-ready communities. And there is just a lot we don't know yet about how sea level rise is going to affect communities in the Gulf of Maine. And one of the things that surprises a lot of people is in a state that has 5,000 miles of coastline, if you include the islands, that's more than the entire state of California. There are only 3 tide gauges that the federal government maintains for multi-decadal records around sea level rise. That amazed me when I arrived, and our team has been very active in working with communities to add more tide gauges so we can get more predictability around the impacts of sea level rise. But just knowing the tide level isn't enough. You actually need the data that Dave showed in that image earlier about what does a particular level of tide or a particular storm condition mean for flooding. So one of the really cool things that we're able to do with some support from the National Science Foundation and other private donors is work with citizens in towns up and down the coast. And we particularly have focused efforts here in Portland, in Boothbay Harbor, in Machias, and in the village of St. George, or the town of St. George in Midcoast. And we are supporting students, people of all ages. You see some students here working with one of our educators to go out during high tide events or storm events and actually collect data on the extent of flooding in their community. We capture all of that community science and then we share it with the National Weather Service along with the better, more localized tide information we can gather through installing more tide gauges so that we can have better weather forecasts about the extent of flooding in Maine's coastal towns. So we're really at the forefront of doing this work here in Maine and here in Portland. And again, it's something that we want to not only provide so people here have more actionable information to prepare for flooding events, but then share with other parts of the country and the world.
Can you talk, both of you, either of you, talk about maybe some specific examples of collaboration that you've had with either businesses or communities and what that impact has been and what it looks like now?
Yeah, well, I'll give a business example, and I know Dave has a community example to share. So this is actually something we're excited to talk about publicly for the first time. We've had a relationship with Hannaford and their parent company, Ahold Delhaize, for over a decade, and that is focused on our original line of work, which was understanding the fishing industries, understanding how the changing oceans are affecting fishing and seafood. So we advise Hannaford and their parent company on seafood sustainability, so that when you go to Hannaford, you can feel confident that what you're buying at the fish counter is harvested sustainably. Well, in talking with the Hannaford team about their challenges, this question around storms, flooding, how to prepare the business for the impacts of climate change was a high priority for the Hannaford team. So we developed a new partnership that we are just beginning to implement to help assess climate risk to their stores and the surrounding communities. So we're starting here in Portland and South Portland, working in the Mill Creek and Back Cove stores in South Portland and Portland respectively. And our scientists will be doing flooding assessments for those properties and the surrounding communities. And it'll allow Hannaford not only to climate-proof their own physical store operations, but really serve as climate ambassadors to reach out to the surrounding communities where their customers live, where their employees live, where they want to be good citizens to help those communities prepare for sea level rise and take climate action. So that work is just kicking off and we're excited about it.
Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I might just highlight one example. You know, we talk a lot about Portland and South Portland in part because there's a lot of capacity and resources, particularly at the municipal level, to really pilot and demonstrate things here. But what's also really important for us at GMRI is to partner with some of these smaller municipalities that don't have, you know, a dedicated sustainability officer. And so a good example is the town of Woolwich. And we've done some work there. There's a town wharf there that is really important for emergency services and for recreational fishermen and aquaculture farmers, to not only characterize the risks to that town wharf that is actually in somewhat disrepair. And anecdotally, I'll just add that one of GMRI's own staffers serves on the climate committee for the town of Woolwich. And so we really do live and breathe this stuff, even in our personal time. And what we've not only been able to do is characterize the risks for a town like Woolwich, which is good and important for them to have, but go the next step. And that's, I think, a really important part, is that we don't want to just be in the business of characterizing the risks, but really identifying and pursuing and executing on a solution. And that's exactly what we're doing. So we've helped them mobilize the finance, build the diverse capital stack needed to really figure out how can you pay for something that is pretty expensive and frankly not necessarily a standard line item in a given town budget. So excited to see that project happen as well.
Well, those are both great examples of just really impactful collaboration that you're having with a business and a community. And I think this example with Hannaford, I mean, they're probably in every community across the state. So really incredible to be able to partner with them. Glenn, do you see these types of partnerships and innovations with businesses being a really key part of addressing the challenges we're facing with climate change?
Absolutely, yeah. Certainly for this question of climate resilience and also for climate action. So companies have an opportunity to support the science that can help them understand their climate risk and help their communities understand their climate risk. Mm-hmm. But they can also, as they're taking action, make changes that can help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by electrifying more of their operations, by improving energy efficiency in their operations. So we have an energy solutions team at GMRI that also partners with companies to figure out how they can become more energy efficient and shift more to clean energy as they're improving their climate resilience.
Great. I have a couple more questions, and then I want to open it to Q&A. The time goes so fast.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, wow. David, I do want to talk to you because I think one of the really, for our organization and for this audience, I think one of the key aspects of how are we addressing climate change is economic development. It's a huge opportunity. And when you talk about mobilizing climate finance, which is like an interesting phrase that I hadn't heard much of, how can Maine attract funding for major resilience projects, and what models are providing or proving effective? And then I'm just curious from both of you, like how can private investment and public infrastructure planning work together to both protect the waterfront and promote sustainable growth? So we'll talk about the economic development impacts right now.
Well, maybe if we could, we'll start with an example that we're super proud of. And just to give this some, this is a shot, this is a before shot of Wrights Wharf where our lab sits. So it's not beautiful, but that's before. We'll get to the after in a moment. But just to give it some context, Dave earlier talked about the Maine Infrastructure Rebuilding and Resilience Commission, which I had to slow down because that's a mouthful. But that report is really worth a read, so that's another resource we would recommend to all of you. But that was formed after the storms, and they assessed it's going to be, we're going to need billions of dollars statewide to repair and rebuild and make our infrastructure more resilient. And we already spent $4 billion on that challenge just over the last 4 years. So it's a significant investment. So how do you pay for it is a key issue that we're all going to have to grapple with. And it's going to have to be a mix of public funding that we can obtain from the federal government, that we will pay for ourselves here in Maine, in the state government, but we're also going to have to come up with very creative private financing strategies. So just an example of what this looks like, our lab on Commercial Street sits on Wrights Wharf. We own that wharf. We also own Union Wharf, just north. But this bulkhead was deteriorating, and it was at risk of collapse. And it was also quite vulnerable to rising seas. So we undertook a project to repair and renovate the bulkhead. And it was ultimately a $4 million project. I call it the $4 million project nobody ever sees because it's kind of tucked away in a corner of the wharf. So to see it from either land or water, you have to really go there to look at it. But here you see the after shot. So we secured $3 million in funding from the American Recovery Plan Act, ARPA, that passed during COVID. And then we're part of a state bond measure for another $1 million. And then we put a final $1 million of private GMRI resources into this. And I would note that Daniel Bannon, the lead engineer on this, the project manager from GEI, is here in the room. So he and GEI did a fantastic job working with our team. We raised the bulkhead 1.5 feet to the commit to manage figure that Dave spoke about earlier to deal with rising seas. But the key point is that it was an economic development investment as well. In the process, we were able to add wharfage. So we now have space for up to 4 commercial berths to extend Portland and Maine's working waterfront. And that's a tenth of a mile, which may not seem like a lot, but statewide we only have roughly 20 miles of working waterfront. So every little bit that we can add or restore is important economic development opportunity for the fishing industry, for the maritime transport and safety industry, and that's what we're doing here on Wrights Wharf. We also, I mentioned taking climate action to decarbonize earlier in a partnership with the Island Institute and the Greater Portland Council of Governments and other organizations. We were able to install that little blue thing you see. That's actually Portland's first high-speed vessel charger. So part of this partnership is Maine Ocean Farms, an oyster farm up in Freeport that has one of the first all-electric vessels that they use to transport their product and to bring in supplies. So when they go from Freeport down to Portland to drop off their oysters and pick up supplies, they need a place to charge. So we now have that on Wright's Wharf, and it's really meant to be a proof of concept so we can encourage more electrification of our fishing and seafood industries and have more economic activity with fewer greenhouse gas emissions.
That's fantastic. And my last question, David, I'm going to pose it to you. Sure. It's about students and how GMRI works with future leaders. I know I saw some high school students here this morning. We always love having you. So can you just talk a little bit about how intergenerational learning fits into building long-term climate resilience for Maine's coastal communities?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the things that I think I'm most proud of personally at GMRI as an organization that does so much with such a relatively lean staff. We really have a flagship program called Lab Venture that brings in 10,000 middle school students every year, free of charge, from every county in the state into our lab to not only experience authentic science experiments, holding lobsters, sorting bycatch, looking at plankton under a microscope, and really sort of building the confidence in these new students to really help them see themselves as scientists, to build their confidence in both STEM and data literacy, and help them become, frankly, ecosystem stewards for the next generation. And importantly, it's also because they're going to be the decision makers, right? I mean, you saw that timeline early on in that plot that, you know, this is not going away anytime soon. So we need to empower these folks to really understand what the risks are and to understand what the opportunities are. And what you see here is one of the tools we use, which is a scenario-based planning exercise that engages intergenerational audiences. And so students, retirees, active community members, to really go through the process of identifying what you value about living in a community, right? And not only doing that, and then understanding the risks, understanding what the trade-offs are associated with different investments on a limited budget, and helpfully when you have older people participate, you have the benefit of historical knowledge, what's worked, what hasn't, and when you have youth at the table as well, you sometimes get some of the most creative ideas because they're oftentimes out of the box and don't have that historical context of what can constrain imagination. And so it's one of the most powerful tools we have, and we've done this in a number of island communities here in Portland and throughout the state. And it's really a wonderful experience and something that I think we're particularly proud of and I think is a template and model for decision-making in the years to come.
Well, whether you grew up here and had the chance to go to GMRI in grade school or not, I highly recommend you go check out GMRI. We took our board there, I think, last year for a tour and just an informational session. We had full attendance of the board, which is amazing. Lots of interest. What you guys are doing is absolutely incredible. So I want to thank you for that, and thank you for being such a great partner and collaborator. And I do want to open it to some questions from the audience. So I see a hand. Oh, here comes Kelly. Just give your name and organization and then pose the question.
Good morning, Allison Hodgkins, World Affairs Council of Maine. You mentioned some federal funding in what you were talking about. We also receive federal funding. There are a lot of organizations that receive federal funding, and when you receive federal funding, there is an expectation that you will take the current administration's priorities into consideration with what you're doing in your funding applications. How are you preparing as GMRI and with this critical work in this critical period, how are you planning to navigate that expectation with this administration?
Yeah, great question. So at GMRI, and this is probably true for a lot of research organizations here in the region, we depend on both federal money and private money, and for GMRI, it's been about half and half over the years. And of course, this year, we've been watching what's happening in Washington, what's happening in the agencies that we partner with, and no surprise, there are fewer opportunities to generate that federal funding than there had been in previous years. So we are nonpartisan. We have a big tent. We work with all of the communities in the Gulf of Maine. And that means the priorities we work on are shared priorities, right and left, Republican, Democratic, and it's all about practical solutions. So I'm pleased to say that a number of the agencies we work with, like NOAA Fisheries, for example, continue to be very focused on how do we help the fishing and seafood industries adapt to the changing ocean, become more competitive. So we're seeing opportunities in this administration to where our work can align with some of the things they want to do. But we're eyes open, and we recognize that there aren't going to be as many opportunities for those federally funded projects as there had been in the past. So we're very focused on how can we be more creative in how we generate financing for some of these activities. And I guess one point I wanted to leave everyone with, when it comes to this very expensive proposition of rebuilding and making our infrastructure and our businesses more climate resilient, we have in the past relied on a lot of federal funding for that. You heard the ratio of 3 million to 1 million to 1 million, federal, state, private for that project I described. That ratio is going to have to shift, right? So we're going to have to figure out how do we generate more money as a state, and that's a big part of the commission that we spoke about earlier, their recommendations. How can the state generate more of its own resources? But we're also going to have to figure out how do we generate more creative private financing. So that's one of the things we're super excited about. In this issue of climate resilience, for example, there are opportunities to work with the insurance industry. Again, think about what I said earlier, $1 invested in resilience pays $13 in avoided cost. So you can monetize those avoided costs with the insurance industry. It makes sense for them to be supporting investments in resilience so they reduce their payout later. So partnering with MMG Insurance here, we're beginning to think about a nationwide program of how the insurance industry can invest in resilience for its own business benefit as well as the opportunities that provides us. And also municipal finance. So again, you think about those avoided costs. Those are real costs that can be saved. So how can we do more municipal bonds that we can get the private capital markets to be investing in resilience infrastructure? So we have a climate finance team at GMRI under David's watch, and we'd love to work with any of you who are trying to figure out how do we shift the balance from federal funding to state and ultimately private funding for these challenges.
Great question, thank you. We have another question in the back.
Okay, sure. My name is Benjamin Cheney. I'm here with the USM. Just my brief question, which may produce a long answer, but of course, just being succinct as possible is fine. And in the your presentation so far, the main impact of climate change in Maine that you talked about was sea level rise, but another major impact is the Gulf of Maine is one of the most increasingly acidic bodies of water in the world, and obviously that has environmental and economic effects. And I'm just wondering what your initiatives, ambitions, programs, what are you trying to do to address that?
Sure, yeah, so ocean acidification, for everyone's awareness, happens because the oceans provide us with an enormous ecosystem service. They absorb almost 1/3 of the carbon dioxide that humanity emits into the atmosphere. And so without that ecosystem service, the atmosphere would be even warmer than it already is. A consequence of the oceans absorbing that carbon dioxide, of course, is that it converts into carbonic acid, which can lead to ocean acidification and have impacts on, say, the shellfish industry, for example, and the broader ecosystem. We actually, incidentally, one of the only federal awards we've received this year so far is to do to begin scoping a regional vulnerability assessment for Casco Bay on ocean acidification. So that will be engaging a number of aquaculture farmers and other near-shore, inshore users of the marine environment to understand what they're seeing, working with Friends of Casco Bay Estuary Partnership to improve monitoring and ultimately think about some resilience strategies to address that. There have been efforts. One thing that has shown very localized opportunity is the co-location of kelp aquaculture or growing kelp alongside shellfish farms. And the reason why that works, right, is that kelp, just like a tree on land, absorbs carbon dioxide. Instead of being from the atmosphere like a tree, it's from the ocean water. And so you have, if you go back to your high school chemistry, a localized buffering capacity that helps. And that will build resilience within the region's burgeoning shellfish industry. So that's one example. There are other potential approaches that are more anthropogenically induced, which could include this broad suite of strategies around so-called marine carbon dioxide removal. And that would oftentimes take carbon dioxide not only out of the atmosphere, but out of the ocean water. But those are very leading edge and oftentimes have a lot of highly uncertain consequences. And so part of our role is to really understand what the potential ecosystem risks are. So it's a great issue to highlight. There is some built-in resilience into this system here. But at the end of the day, given the importance of the region's shellfish aquaculture industry, it's something that we need to be really grappling with right now. So I appreciate you flagging it.
Do we have one more quick question? I see one. Where they're going to go.
Hi, I'm Nat Cram. I'm an architect at SMRT. And with the increasing level of sea rise, how have you been integrating with the planning department with the city of Portland and South Portland, for instance? And what should the building industry anticipate for requirements to inform the new work that we are doing in building in these communities so that they can anticipate this rise?
It's a great question, and it's a huge one, right? In the sense that Portland obviously is a peninsular city, and I didn't tee this up, I promise you, but I have this map in my office because it's such a profound example to me of how we have altered the coastline historically. This is a map from the Osher Map Library. The date's cut off, but it's from the late 18th century when this was then called Falmouth. And you could see all of the fill that we put in Bayside and on Commercial Street. And what I like to highlight is that we have enormously and profoundly changed how humanity interacts with the coastline. And we did that 250 years ago with far less technology, far less manpower, far less resources. And we're going to have to do it again. But we now have the added luxury of having far more technology, far more person power, and far more resources. And there's going to be some really difficult decisions that we need to make in thinking about potentially community-driven relocation. But at the end of the day, there's a whole suite of architectural and structural engineering solutions that a number of folks in this room have been a part of. And again, I think the city of Portland has been on the leading edge in thinking about and working with developers to figure out what are design solutions, right? And we don't need to invent this from scratch. Communities like New Orleans, like over in the Netherlands, have been dealing with this for decades. And like I said, the Coastal Flood Resilience Overlay Zone, I think, is a really big and important step for us to take. But it probably can't and shouldn't be the only tool in our toolbox. And so engaging, I think, with the business community, with developers to understand practicalities that may mean altering zoning in terms of what allowable height is for structure to make a given project economically viable. But those types of conversations need to happen and are happening, but it's a really, really important one for us to grapple with.
And just in close, I know there was more questions in the audience, and hopefully Glenn and David can stick around for a few minutes after to answer those. But in close, what would be like the final message you would leave this audience, or is there an ask of this audience moving forward? I'll start with Glenn.
Yeah, I would say let's figure out how to partner. I mentioned at the beginning, collaboration is at the heart of everything we do. This challenge of sea level rise and climate impact affects all of us. We're only going to create the best solutions together. So you saw what we're doing with Hannaford. If there are other businesses that want to talk about climate partnerships, we'd love to do that. And then I would say, whether it's with GMRI or some other organization that can provide you with support, think about this as not just an investment in avoiding risk, but an investment in economic growth and opportunity. So if you take action in an intelligent way against these flooding and other climate risks, you can actually unlock economic opportunities for your business or your community. That's what we're trying to do in that Wrights Wharf example.
Glenn said it well. I think that the thing I would just again emphasize is this notion of partnership. You know, as you highlighted with the kind of withdrawal of the federal leadership and federal investment in communities, it becomes increasingly important for corporate partners to step up, take a leadership role, subnational actors to take a leadership role, and we are eager as an organization to build on the successful partnerships we've had with corporates throughout the region to not only, you know, realize our vision, but also importantly, improve your bottom line as businesses. So please reach out. We would love to partner with you, explore what your needs are and how, frankly, the expertise and ingenuity of GMRI can make that a reality.
This is not the last you are going to hear from us in GMRI. We want to find more ways that we can partner with the business community, figure out how we can educate you on what GMRI is doing, and how you can get more engaged in making changes in your own business that's going to help us combat climate change. So I hope you join us for those conversations that we'll have lined up in 2026. And with that, I'd love to give a round of applause to our panel, Glenn and David. Yeah, we could have talked for a lot longer. There were a lot of questions in the audience that I know we didn't get to, and I apologize, but thank you so much for joining us this morning. Have a wonderful holiday season. Be careful on the ice out there, and we'll see you back here in 2026.